Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are back for my week 4 in the LCK overview, analysis, and at the end, my power rankings. Hope you guys are excited. Obviously, we took last week off like we did for the LPL as well because everybody has a break right at the beginning of February when it comes to League of Legends, but we are back now. I will say this week in particular is going to be a very weird one to go over in terms of review, in terms of analysis, because a lot of teams were hit with COVID restrictions. Kind of coming into this, there are multiple teams that are not fielding even half of their real roster. So definitely some interesting series that have happened this week, and some teams that maybe picked up wins that they normally wouldn't have gotten, or at least maybe not as easily because of some of the roster restrictions that some other teams in the league might be going through. So definitely some interesting things there. We'll get to that when we get to them. But as you guys know, we're going to be going over every single series in the LCK from week 4, going over my player of the game, my dud of the game, and so on. If you guys are excited, go ahead and tell me that in the comment section below. Let me know what series you were most excited for going into this week. There were a lot of good ones to choose from. Top of the table clash kind of in there as well, but without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into our first series here of day 1, which was T1 taking on Hanwha Life. In a 2-1 series win for T1 that they do manage to scrape out after a very interesting game 1 that Hanwha Life actually was able to pick up here off the back of Dudu actually playing really well in the top lane on the Jax, and then getting to the point in the game where the Zeri just, with the Yuumi on her back, could really just take over the game. Zeus, I think, overall didn't have a very good series here. He definitely was a little bit of a problem for this T1 team, but I think it was fine. In Game 1, it wasn't fine. In Game 1, the Gwen lost really hard to the Jax here, and just kind of got to the point where it was unplayable. Dudu was able to split push the entire game. SAMD was able to team fight. I know a lot of people are really mad about Faker, about picking that Ryze early on, but I don't know. I think the problem there is just the comp that he's playing it into. When you pick Ryze, you're ideally picking it into a shorter range comp, especially if you want to go that damage build, which he did in Game 1 here. You definitely need to pick it into something that you feel safer into, and certainly this comp is not it. You're going to get blown up by the Victor, you're going to get blown up by the Jarvan, you're going to get blown up by the Zeri. A lot of people can get on top of you, a lot of people can deal damage, so I can understand the frustration with picking Ryze there. I think maybe the tank build was definitely the way to go in this game, especially with an Aphelios and a Karma. I feel like you're not struggling for damage. And even though he went the damage build because of how short range he was and how little impact that champion has when you build damage, Lee Sin, I think, actually out-damaged him. Just not a good pick in Game 1. Games 2 and 3 were a lot better for T1 off of the back of this bot lane just being too good, right? Guma's actually had kind of a rough run of things, I think, in like the past couple series, but he was really good in this series, and Keria was phenomenal. Keria is going to be my player of the series here. His games 2 and 3 on Tahm Kench are just unbelievable. You don't often associate a champion like Tahm Kench with being super mechanically skillful or having a lot of intricacies to his kit, but when a really good player plays Tahm Kench, you can just, the timing on everything feels so much more crisp. And that's what you got with Keria here. He was phenomenal. He's proving why and I think a lot of other people consider him to just easily be the best support in the world. That's not to say Gumayushi didn't have a good couple games here. That Jinx game in Game 2 was especially good. But he also played well in the Jhin in Game 3. I just wanted to give a nice shout out to Keria because I thought he was rather good. But like I said, T1 wasn't all perfect. I think Zeus definitely got the short end of the stick in the top lane. He was someone who wasn't given a lot of resources by his team. Not that they didn't not play top. I don't know. They played everywhere, right? But Zeus was also given a lot of attention by the enemy team due to actually having a great series and essentially just outplaying Zeus for pretty much the entirety, all 3 games of this series. Not a good look for Zeus, who's someone I've personally been a little bit lower on this year than a lot of other people. His laning stats just aren't it for me. I think he can bounce back in team fights. He seems to be rather, I don't want to say untiltable because I don't know, we don't know comms or anything like that, but it definitely seems like if he loses early, it's not too pressing for him. He could still make an impact later in games, which is good, but he definitely struggles in lane, at least a little bit. As for Hanwha, it's a decent series, right? You have a really good game top lane in Game 1, and SAMD does well there, and then bot lane just gets utterly obliterated in the last 2 games here. Especially in that game 3 here, you're picking the Caitlyn Karma, which is just objectively like a ridiculously strong lane. You're going to be on the push the entire time. You have so much poke. You have so much, you have so many ways to just kind of push the opponent out of lane. And they didn't necessarily do that. They still lost lane to a Jhin Tahm Kench, which I think is really not good. The spot lane has been kind of disappointing ever since week 1. I think they started off pretty strong, and ever since then they've kind of been a lot weaker. I know some people were really high on Vista coming into the year. I really just haven't seen it. I think the player that has played much better in this lane has definitely been SAMD for the most part. I think Vista has honestly just been a below average support in the LCK this year. There really isn't much else to say about that. Karras is too young to really put the game on his back. On Fleek made some really good plays, but he also made some really bad ones. He is tentatively going to get my dud of the series here. I think this could go to him or it could go to Zeus. Zeus, I think, lost more apparently in lane, but I think On Fleek made some really questionable decisions, even if he made more actively good plays. So I'm going to give it to On Fleek on the Jarvan here. I say on the Jarvan because he was on the Jarvan all 3 games here, but definitely needed to see more out of him. He's been up and down this year, and he's kind of been the cog that turns the wheel of Hanwha Life when he's playing well. This team tends to play well when he's not playing well. This team tends to not play well, and unfortunately for this one, he was just dying a little bit too much for my taste. But overall, not the worst loss in the world for Hanwha. They won a game against T1. You're always going to take that, and T1 stays undefeated. So you can only complain about so much here. Moving on to the second series here of day 1, we had DRX taking on KT Rolster. And this is a battle between 2 teams that I think are kind of on the up and up right now, both getting pretty solid wins in their last couple series, both kind of really starting to get something going. Fortunately for DRX, a lot of their roster was not cleared to play game 1, and so they had a lot of non-cleared people playing in game 1. They had basically their entire Challengers team playing except for Deft. And you would think that would be a problem, but they actually have what is easily the best Challengers team in Challengers' career right now. They're 13-1. This team has been really, really dominant, and these players come in game 1 and actually win and beat KT Rolster pretty convincingly, I might add. Probably the most convincing of the games. Not that it was, like, dominant, but it was pretty, they were definitely in the lead here. Obviously, off the back of Deft being really good, Satab actually playing really well on that Victor, and then I really liked how Clear played in the top lane on Gwen. This DRX team playing really well in game 1. The rest of the team was actually able to come back in game 2, and then they actually drop a pretty hard-fought game 2 here. Game 2 was really interesting. It was kind of off the back of just, like I said, Zeri and Yuumi just being really dominant. That combo, if you do get it to the point where Zeri is able to do damage, like where you're at the point where Zeri hurts, then it's going to be really strong, right? Zeri, that lane is incredibly weak early, and it's super exploitable if you pick something like a Caitlyn. But if you don't have that, then it's really tough to deal with it because it is going to outscale you pretty much always. Even on like the Senna, which I've talked about, I think is a pretty good pick into Zeri overall. I think once you get to like 45 minutes, it's not the same, right? But then moving on to game 3, DRX does take that one back. They do win actually with their subs in, or with their main roster, I should say, in just off the back of Deft's Jinx. When Deft gets Jinx, they win. I mean, that is as clear-cut as it's been all year long for pretty much anybody playing any champion in the world, maybe other than Rascal playing Lee Sin. But, Deft on Jinx has just been unstoppable. His Jinx is perfect. It's amazing. Deft is my player of the series here. He was great in game 1 on the Aphelios. He was great in game 3 on the Jinx. He has, like, quietly been an MVP candidate here for DRX. He has been phenomenal this year. Basically, all of their wins have come off the back of Deft just being the best AD carry in the region right now, maybe other than Guma. I don't know anybody else who's really playing at that same level. Not that I'm saying that he's, like, better than Ruler or better than Dectum, although I think you could definitely make a case that he's better than Dectum. Not saying he's, like, better than Ruler, just definitely that he's played better than Ruler so far this year. He's definitely had more resources tossed his way. But Deft has just been the hyper carry that I think DRX really wanted him to be coming back here. He's really hooked up with Beryl, I think, really, really well. Those two seem to have good chemistry. If the rest of the team can just get a little bit more consistent, I think you're going to be looking at a very, very dangerous team come playoff time. But as for KT Rolster, definitely some problems in this one. I'm still super concerned about the mid-jungle duo, right? Arya is going to be my dud of the series here. 2 games of a 0 that certainly did not work. I just don't know if you can play this champion in the meta right now unless you are, like, really, really good on it because you have to be aggressive. Azir is a pick that, especially if you're playing it into something like a Victor, you have to play that to win. You can't play that to go even and still feel like you're having the same kind of impact because Azir just doesn't have that kind of impact on the game overall right now, in my opinion, unless you're just dominant on Azir. You're making these plays where you're flashing in and you're doing the Shurima shuffle and creating disruption for the enemy team. Your damage output is just not high enough as that champion at the moment for you to be warranted picking it, and Arya did not have a good series on that. He's not one of those players who I think wants to make those super hyper aggressive plays on Azir in competitive, but that really punished him there. And then really weird play in game 3 from Arya where you're playing against a Twisted Fate as a Sylas. Okay, that's great. Twisted Fate ults bot lane to go for a play. Okay, that's fine, but you have Herald, so you can drop Herald, you can get a bunch of plates, you can kind of move forward, but he actually backs instead with the increased Herald buff. By the time he gets back into lane, you have multiple people that have come to cover in the mid, and then you drop the Herald, and the Herald barely gets a charge off, if it does even get a charge off. I don't even remember. Just felt like a very weird play there. You could have easily traded towers, bot for mid, but for some reason, I guess you just didn't want to do that. I don't know. Arya played very odd in this series. He's played odd all year long. I think he's kind of been a weakness for this team. Cuz did not have particularly amazing series. I don't really like the Nidalee pick in game 1. I've talked about that. Not really a fan of the Nidalee pick right now unless you're, really, 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 really good on Nidalee. And then the Diana pick with the Sylas, it just feels like a very weird combo. You're definitely looking to play towards Rascal's Renekton with that, but Renekton, just right now in the meta, doesn't feel like a pick that is worth, building, you're picking your jungle around, essentially. I know Renekton Nidalee's great. I know Renekton Diana can be really good, but it just doesn't seem like that's the way to go right now when your bot lane is losing so hard, honestly, like they did in game 3 on the Senatom Kench into that Jinx Karma. So yeah, definitely some things to fix for KT Rolster. This is not the same team that we saw beat Gen.G for sure, but props to DRX. This team is on the up and up. I think they've won, 3 in a row, maybe 4 in a row now. I don't remember. This is their 4th win. I don't know if those have all been in a row. It's at minimum 3 in a row. They're on a pretty big hot streak right now. They've definitely gotten to the form that I think a lot of people expected from them at the beginning of the year, and this team definitely looks like someone that can, at the very least, be a hard out in the playoffs if they continue this momentum. Moving on to day 2 here. We were kicking off day 2 with DAMWON Kia taking on Kwangdong Freecs in a pretty solid 2-0 win here for DAMWON. Really never too much in question. This is a really good team versus a team that is really, really struggling right now. DAMWON looked good. In game 1, it was really off the back of Showmaker's Tank Rise. I know a lot of people hate Tank Rise. I get it. It doesn't necessarily win in the LCK. It wins elsewhere in the world, so I'm not nearly as down on Tank Rise as I am on some other things right now, but I understand that it just doesn't feel quite as impactful as some other mid lane options theoretically could be. But if you ever want an example of when Tank Rise can be like super duper effective, game 1 here against Kwangdong is absolutely that game. Rise was really, really unkillable and untouchable in this one. This is the perfect comp to play something like a Rise in, because while they do have range, it's not long range. You're going to be able to root the Zeri. You're going to be able to root the Akshan. Whatever you really need to do in those late game team fights, you're going to be able to do. Some really, really interesting plays made by KDF. This was winnable, I think, for Kwangdong. Fate actually makes a really good play blowing up the Diana in a Baron play that Keen basically just throws away by inting, flashing into the Baron pit, and pretty much immediately dying, giving the Baron away to DAMWON, making it so much easier. Just not a good play, overall speaking. Keen, a lot of people are hyping up how he played early in this game. In game 1 especially, like he was able to win lane against the Graves and was up by a lot, and people are saying, oh, Keen's elo trapped. I don't know, man. Keen this year is not the Keen that we saw last year where he was winning lane and then doing his best in team fights and they were still losing because the rest of his team lost. Yes, the rest of his team are losing, and yes, he is winning early game, but he's making some really bad plays, like going into mid and late game. This was an example of that. This was a straight up a bad play from Keen that arguably lost them the game. And I don't know. I'm not seeing this is not the same Keen that we saw last year. I think there are definitely some things about this that are less consistent from him. And he really needs to step that up, even if his laning phase is good. But Game 2 is definitely a different story in that respect because Bertle just completely obliterated him as soon as he got that Hull Breaker onto Graves. It was disgusting. Once you get that item onto Graves, especially into a comp that's Tank Ryze, Tank Jarvan, Akali, who's not really full damage right now, you're just never going to be able to kill that Graves. And they weren't. They really weren't able to deal with Bertle. At all that game, Canyon was able to kind of take over the rest of the map on the Lee Sin. Showmaker's going to be my player of the series here, tentatively, because, again, he had a really good series on the Ryze. He didn't necessarily do a ton in Game 2 on the Syndra, but he was still better. I think he showed when Fate played that Tank Ryze in Game 2 that you really do have to be a good player to pull off Tank Ryze, because Fate tried to pull it off and it just absolutely didn't work for him. Showmaker was able to position in a way that made it pretty much impossible for Fate to do anything. And I think that, to me, makes his Game 1 even more impressive. So, yeah, the player of the series for me is going to go to Showmaker here. Bertle also had a fantastic Game 2. Like I said, he basically took over that entire map in Game 2 on the Graves, created so much, allowed Canyon to do pretty much whatever he wanted anywhere else. The bot lane, as per usual, was an afterthought for DK, which isn't a bad thing. They can play weak side pretty effectively, and I think it's starting to become something that they're more comfortable with. I really like the Karma Ezreal lane for weak side bot lanes right now. I think that is one of the stronger weak side bot lanes in general. But the Syndra play I think was fine. Lee Sin was able to get a lot of pressure mid lane, and the map just ended up opening up through that. For KDF, rough series. Like I said with Keen, a lot of people are saying he's stuck in Elo Hell. I don't think it's necessarily that. I think he's part of the reason this team isn't playing particularly well. I don't think anyone on this team is playing particularly well at the moment. There's a reason this team has 2 wins in 6 series, not 6 matches, 6 series. They've won 2 games out of their first 14, which is just gigabit. I mean, it's just horrible, right? There's a reason that this team is easily the bottom of the LCK standings right now. No one on this team is playing well, at least consistently well. Hoyt is going to be my dud of the series here. Again, he's had a really rough start to the year. That's been well documented. Him and Elam have been quite a negative for this KDF team. Elam kind of takes a lot of the blame a lot of the time because he is making maybe the more obvious bad plays, but Hoyt makes very little outstandingly good plays. At least he has this year. Teddy can't really do much. I don't think he's played like horrible, but he hasn't played well either. Fate makes good plays sometimes and then goes and plays Tank Ryze and plays it completely wrong. And then, like I said, Keen gets advantages early in lane, but just seems to have no idea how to transition those advantages into anything tangible late game. Very similar to the complaints I had about Alfari in the LEC so far this year. Even if you win lane, like the point of winning lane is not to win lane, it's to do something with the lead that you generate from winning lane. And that seems to be the problem that Keen has right now, is he can get the lead, he just doesn't actually do anything with the lead. So what's the point of even getting the lead in the first place if you're not going to do anything with it? But, outside of that, this KDF team still does have talent, so it's not like they're completely out of the water. I just don't think they're going to be a playoff team. Hopefully they can turn things around, but, if you need to start making changes, then you need to start making changes because this roster is clearly not working. As for DAMWON, you're still kind of on a roll here. I still think you're a little bit of a notch below the top 2 teams, as we saw in their series against both of them. But you're still a fantastic team, and Bertle is getting better every game, and I think that is a really big factor for this team. If Bertle continues to get better and he can really become kind of that X factor that this team really needs, they love to play through top lane as they showed last year and the year before. And then Dektum and Kellen can be a little bit more sustainable, I think, in the bottom lane. Canyon and Showmaker have had really good starts to the year, so I do think this team can get back up there. It's just about whether or not these guys continue to develop on the progress that they're showing at the moment. Moving on to Game 2 here of Day 2, or Series 2, I should say. We had Liiv, SANDBOX taking on Gen.G. A nice 2-1 series win here for Gen.G, even though they are not at full strength. Missing out on your jungle and your support can be a pretty big deal, considering those two are kind of the positions that are most associated with your big macro decisions, especially early game. And that's kind of where Gen.G is at right now. You're missing out on Peanut, you got Young-Jae in there. You're missing out on Lehens, you got Laspa in there. Just kind of an interesting look here. In Game 1, it did not look like it was going to work. Young-Jae was not good. Missing out on Peanut felt like a gigantic deal as Krako just kind of took over the entire map on Lee Sin. There was really not much that Gen.G could do. Young-Jae tried to pull out the Poppy. It's something that this Gen.G team has played all year long. It's been basically Peanut's signature pick in 2022, but clearly he's not Peanut on that pick, which is fine. You can't expect him to be that, but it didn't work in Game 1. Krako kind of took over the game, and they were able to snowball from there. Game 2 was definitely a different story. Doran just got so ahead on the Fiora. And honestly, Laspa was fantastic on the Leona in those late game teamfight engages. Really just an unbelievable game there from Laspa and Doran, kind of carrying the load for Gen.G. And then in game 3, it was really Chovy that kind of took over on the Vex, having a great game, and then Ruler late game. Like Chovy early game, and then kind of passing the torch over to Ruler's Aphelios, who basically, he gave a complete masterclass on how to play that champion. He played it unbelievably well. I'm going to give Chovy my player of the series here because he was really good in game 2 on the LeBlanc and really good in game 3 on the Vex. He only died once the entire series, and it was to a level 2 gank from Krako in game 1, but outside of that, he was completely deathless. It was a really, really just clean series from Chovy. Exactly what you want to see out of your star player. Like I said, Ruler had a phenomenal game 3. This is a complete masterclass on how to carry a late game team fight as an Aphelios. This is exactly how you do it. Even though the team was ahead at that point, it was still, you know, you still did everything you absolutely needed to do in that respect. This was probably Ruler's best game of the year so far. It seems like, hopefully, fingers crossed, this series is a sign of him getting back into form, because he's not really been there at the beginning of the season so far. Not that he's been bad, he just hasn't been Ruler, right? I projected him to be the best AD carry in the LCK, and that is not what he has been to start the year, at least here. But Laspa coming in playing really, really well. This is a guy who actually got benched from the Gen.G Challenger team, so kind of interesting there. He comes in and he makes some mistakes in game 1. He was definitely kind of shaky in game 1 on the Nautilus, but his games 2 and 3 were really, really good for this Gen.G team. He will continue to play well later in the week, and I'll talk about that later, but really, really impressive showing from him. And then Doran with just pretty much an untouchable game on that Fiora. And once that champion gets ahead, it's really, really difficult to deal with. Youngjae wasn't particularly good, but he still was able to facilitate late game and be a nuisance for the enemy team. And that's all he really needs to be when you have Chovy, Ruler, Doran, you know, on your team. You need to not be the problem. So, for Liiv, I mean, they had good parts and they had bad parts. Krako played really well in game 1. He's definitely come off of a Rookie of the Year season and become, you know, I don't want to say a lot worse, but he's definitely started the year a lot slower. Ice has come in and been hit or miss. He was good in game 1 on the Zeri, games 2 and 3 on the Zeri, not so much. I don't know if it's a synergy thing with him and Kale, but it's certainly not great. I mean, Envy wasn't great when he was in there either. Neither really showed to have a ton of promise. I don't really know who I would go with at this point. Clearly, they want to go with Ice, so we'll stick with that for now. Closer had one of his better series in a while. He has been about as horrendous as you could possibly think over the past couple series, but kind of turned around in this one a little bit. Had a good Akali game in game 1. Dove was a nightmare. He's my dud of the series. Dove was not good. He got completely outclassed in game 2 on the Tryndamere, and then in game 3, he was also outclassed on the Jax by Doran's Tryndamere, so not a good series at all from Dove. He was atrocious. And this is somebody who they're kind of relying on to be a little bit more of a stable force in that top lane. He was never going to be as good as Doran, but you can't lose this hard, especially on that Tryndamere. It's a matchup that you really shouldn't be losing that badly. Fiora's not that untouchable when it comes to Tryndamere, so I don't know. It's a matchup you really shouldn't be just like AFK losing on and giving no thought to. So Dove easily my dud of the series, but Liiv SANDBOX, they're just a bottom tier team. There's really nothing else to say at this point. Krako's a good player, but outside of that on this team, I'm not sure they even have another good player. Everybody else on this team at best is playing okay. And that, you know, at worst has been, you know, they're all essentially having the worst years of their career. On Gen.G's side, they're going to be happy to pull out this win because obviously you have all these subs, but, you know, it's really hard to judge the team for how good they're playing because really it was the 3 actual players that were carrying the team, right? Doran had a really good game. Chovy absolutely carried here. Ruler took over in that team fight in game 3. These were the guys who really stepped up and made Gen.G winners, and I think that's a good sign, but it also makes it, you know, what else is new? You know, these players are good. What a shocker. Moving on to day 3 here. Kicking off day 3 for us was a battle between Nongshim, RedForce, and Fredit BRION. That was actually a really interesting series. As you can see, a couple of interesting changes here. I've gone through the COVID list, I guess, a little bit before. And, you know, definitely some interesting, you know, I would say people on that list for Nongshim, and it really did affect their week, like, quite a bit. Obviously, you see Fiesta in the mid lane, no BDD. Ghost wasn't cleared to play game 1. He does end up playing games 2 and 3, but not at AD carry, so Vital comes in and plays ADC. And then, at support, No effort, no Peter, so you have Blessing in game 1. And then you get Ghost back, but instead of Ghost going to play ADC, you actually bring Ghost in for Blessing and play him at support. A very interesting look here from Nongshim. BRION is in full force here. They start Sword in game 1, they go to Morgan in games 2 and 3. Morgan definitely looks like a better player than Sword at this point. Sword, I think, looked better early, like when they first started making these changes, but I think we're at the point now where Morgan, I think, maybe the team isn't performing as well, generally speaking, around him, but Morgan, I think's individual performances have been better. But let's talk about game 1. Fredit BRION are able to take the win off the back of the Veigar from Lava, a pick that we've seen a couple times across multiple regions this year, mostly in Europe with Nuke Duck, but he's been, he's been really good this year, secretly. This BRION team has been decently competitive, I think, especially against a lot of the better teams. Very Jin Air in that respect, where they'll kind of take the better teams to 3 games and play them really tough, but never win. That's kind of how Fredit BRION have been in this year, and a lot of that is just due to how well Lava has played, generally speaking. Lava's been really good. He was really good last year as well. He was a big reason why this team way overperformed expectations in summer. And he's doing it again here. He was really good in game 1 on the Veigar. I'm not going to say it was entirely him, but those cages are a really big problem, right? If he lands them, he can do a ton of damage, and you can blow people up pretty much immediately, and he won game 1 essentially because of that. Game 2, Nongshim does bounce back with Ghost in there at support. Ghost was phenomenal at support here. Vital was really, really good here on the Jinx as well. Bot lane looked really good for Nongshim. It's really interesting to see Ghost play so well on the Leona, considering, he's not a support, but clearly this guy plays a lot of support in solo queue and in his free time because he is very practiced on this Leona pick and on these engaged champions. And obviously, being already a bot laner, it's not like he's unfamiliar with the Aphelios-Alistar matchup. He knows how that lane should go and how the Leona should play, just from being in that lane, passively speaking. So he played it really well. He was really, really good in that game too. And then Vital, with a pretty clutch play late in the game on the Jinx too. I believe he took the Baron, which is really, really big. And then you move to game 3 here. Much more back and forth, I'd say. I mean, game 2 was really back and forth, right? But Bro kind of not really establishing a huge lead until Umti is able to kind of develop that for Lava and for Morgan here on the Renekton. I think someone saw that, like, they were complaining in the thread post-match about how I think this is like the first win for Renekton and Ryze on the same team. I don't really get what the problem with either of these picks are. I think they're both fine in their context. Renekton's an early game bully that can transition into a stun magnet and a CC soaker late game. And Ryze can be a really big problem late game if you just leave him untouched. It's just the big problem with Ryze is his range. But both of them were really effective in this one. The Xin Zhao did a lot as well, but honestly, they were both a really big problem for Nongshim, and they couldn't really deal with it very effectively. A lot of people are complaining about Kana's build in this game, and I'm not one to usually complain about builds, but this was certainly a weird one. Divine Sunder on Gang, like the Divine Sunder, I believe in a Collector or something like that on Gangplank. I'd have to look it up again, but it's certainly not a good build. What he built on the Gangplank, one that I certainly would not use myself, and definitely questionable. But, again, if you're a good enough Gangplank player, it honestly shouldn't matter. Your barrels have so much base damage on them that they should still scale relatively well. Just didn't end up working out. Dread is actually going to be my dud of the series here. He was really bad, especially in that game 1 on the Xin Zhao. It just feels like this guy's mentally checked out. I don't know if that's the case, but this is the Dread that we saw on Afrika last year, where he would have some really good games, and then he would have some really just, like, why are you doing that games? I don't know if it's just a consistency problem with him, or if he actually is, like, mentally checked out right now, but it certainly is something, because this was just so weird. That game 1, you've got the Veigar cages, right? It's not so much even Veigar hitting the cage, right? Because you can hit the cage. If Veigar places down the cage, don't walk into the side of it. That's, like, the whole thing with Veigar cage. And it just seems like Dread never got the memo. I don't know if he's ever played against Veigar before. It was a very weird game from Dread. He was really bad in game 3 as well on that Lee Sin. His game 2 was a little bit better, but even not that much better. Really, a lot of game 2 was on the back of Vital and Ghost being really good. So, a weird series here from Dread. He's my dud of the series, but it's hard to judge this Nongshim RedForce team. Again, most of their lineup out with COVID here. Even, I guess technically they have 3 players in, but one of them's not playing his actual position, so I'd like to consider it 3 subs here. Kana and Dread are really the only 2 actual players here, and neither of them really played all that well in the series. Definitely an interesting one for Nongshim, but it's a good win for BRION. Picking up the win here against Nongshim is huge for them. This is a team that I think has, I don't want to say it's a little bit underrated right now, but it's definitely better than I think their record shows. They played a lot of top teams really competitively, and they're able to hang with the bottom teams. I think they just need to get more consistency out of some of their positions, mostly their bottom lane right now, and then figure out whatever their best combination or their best player top lane is. I believe it's going to be Morgan in the long run if you stick with that, but if you want to play Sword, if you want to give him a time, just figure out who your best guy is, get him in there, and get it working, because Umti and Lava are honestly playing really well this season, and I hope that continues on, because I'm actually a little bit of a fan of this Fredit BRION team right now. Moving on to the second series here of Day 3, we had DRX taking on Hanwha Life, and another DRX win as they continue their hot streak that they are on, a 5-series win streak in a row. They're the hottest team in the LCK, maybe other than T1, and it shows. It shows on the Rift, because holy crap, Deft is good. Let's talk about it. In Game 1, it was close-ish, but this is probably the most dominant game in the series. Deft gets ahead, Zika plays well on the Zoe, Kingen plays well on the Gwen, Pioshik has a decent game here on the Viego, and obviously Beryl on the Karma. Everybody just kind of feels good on DRX's side. Not really too much of a trouble. Game 2, Hanwha actually takes, off the back of Dudu playing really well on this Gragas. I mean, these are the kinds of engages that you look for. Karis is able to do a ton of damage on the backline as the Corki, and some decent engages from On Fleek in general. And then Game 3 is really where Deft completely takes over. This is his team at this point, right? I mean, you want to talk about the MVP race, you want to talk about the best AD carry in the LCK this year so far. It's going to be really hard for me to pick anyone but Deft right now for either of those, because, man, this team is on fire, and it feels like it is almost entirely because of this bot lane. Deft, again, is my player of the series. He is phenomenal. He was phenomenal this time. I think that's 4 series in a row now that Deft has been player of the series for DRX, and it shows, right? This guy dominated on the Jhin in Game 1. That Zeri game in Game 3 is really disgusting. That's what happens when this champion has support, and when you put him on a really solid, when you put her on like a really solid player, someone who can play around a lot of her weaknesses, essentially. And when the enemy team doesn't really have a comp that can deal with it. I mean, they should, theoretically. I mean, I really, the only thing they have is Nautilus ult that I think is really, like, dangerous for Zeri, but Nautilus ult is dangerous for Zeri. You get hit with the knockup. If you get hooked, then you're probably dead. But Beryl does a really good job keeping Deft alive, and Deft is just able to take over the game completely. Not all sunshine and rainbows here for DRX. My dud of the series is going to stay on DRX, and it is going to go to Pioshik here in the jungle. Pioshik, as you guys know, is someone who I was really high on going into this year. He's just never been the same ever since that, ever since the speed meta left the jungle, the Hekarims, the Udyrs. He was really good in that meta, and ever since that ended, he hasn't necessarily been the same player, which I find to be kind of strange overall, just because he was good before that meta. It's not like that's the only thing that he can play, right? Or at least it's not like we believe that's the only thing that he can play, but I don't know, it just feels like ever since that meta's ended, he's lost his confidence or something, because it's just, he's not the same player that he was then. But I digress. Either way, DRX still is able to pull out the win here, and they look okay. It's just Pioshik's not the most, consistent right now. For Hanwha, they played 2 really good teams this week, and they played them both competitively. Not the worst week in the world for them. Dudu actually looked really good this week. I think overall he had a really good game on the Gragas in Game 2. He played really well in the series earlier this week as well. I think he had a good Jax game in that one. Played Jax in Game 1 here, wasn't nearly as effective into the Gwen matchup, which honestly should be pretty good for the Gwen overall, but maybe not as the game goes onward. But generally speaking, I don't think Hanwha is too upset about how this week went. They played, they're a bottom tier team, and they held tough with 2 top tier teams, even if those top tier teams have some issues, right? But either way, not too much to say about them. Like I said, bottom 2, bottom 3 team in the LCK. They don't look particularly good, but they're fine. They can hang with a decent team. But for DRX, I mean, you're completely on fire right now. Deft and Beryl look like the best bot lane in the LCK. It's really just Guma and Keria that would even kind of argue for that. Ruler and Lehens, I think, might get there, but we're going to have to see more consistency with that. But Deft and Beryl have been legitimately unbelievable, and if that continues, I don't see any way that this team is anything less than a top 4 team in the LCK by the end of the year. Moving on to Day 4 here of Week 4, we had that kicked off with what everybody thought the match of the week was going to be, but unfortunately, COVID had some other plans. We had T1 taking on Gen.G, a top-of-the-table clash, 1 and 2, coming head-to-head for the first time this year, and 3 members of Gen.G aren't playing. And one of the members of Gen.G that is playing is not playing in the correct role. Yeah, just a really unfortunate situation here. I know everybody wanted to see T1 versus Gen.G, me included, for sure. And we don't get it, because, unfortunately, Gen.G has to play a bunch of subs, and the series isn't particularly close because of that. Obviously, I have Quid listed as the top laner and Chovy listed as the mid laner here, because that's how they were listed in like Draft and Champ Select and on Wikipedia and every source that I could find. But don't get it wrong, Chovy played top lane this series. Chovy was the top laner, Quid was the mid laner. So I'm going to be talking to them as if you guys can see that Chovy is the top laner and Quid is the mid laner, because that's how they played in the series. Not a great series here from Gen.G. We'll talk about T1 first. T1 just looked really consistent, as they have all year long. Really, this is the combo of Owner and Faker that really won them this series. Not the Guma and Keria and Zeus played poorly. Just that Owner and Faker were kind of the focal points, I think. Especially in Game 1 here. Game 1 was pretty much all Faker. Late game on that Corki. Basically, once you get to that point on Corki, you're just going to win the game. This game was 45 minutes. Basically, just thanks to the Tryndamere split pushing and keeping the game alive for as long as possible. But, yeah, you're never going to win against Faker's Corki after that long. His positioning's great there. You had some great setups there by Owner in general as well. And Gumayusi on the Ezreal was doing a good amount of damage. It was basically at that endgame Corki's damage versus Zeri damage, but Zeri needs significantly more setup and more help to do her damage than Corki does late game. So Corki was able to win that one pretty easily. And then in Game 2, it was a lot less clean. Or I would say it was a lot more clean. It was a lot less competitive. I think overall it was just kind of a stomp from T1. Even when Gen.G wanted to make plays across the map, they just couldn't, because T1 had basically perfect macro here in Game 2. Pretty much exactly what you wanted to see from a top-tier team here. Owner is going to be my player of the series here. He basically controlled the map both games here. The Viego game in Game 1 was fine, but the Xin Zhao game in Game 2 was really phenomenal. My dud of the series is going to go to Chovy. He did some interesting things on the Tryndamere in Game 1 and wasn't particularly bad in that one, just didn't have the best game. In Game 2, he was bad. He was bad on the Yasuo, and this is 100% win rate Chovy Yasuo that he plays here. Couldn't pull it out here in the top lane. Goes into the Gnar and just gets obliterated. Dies twice in lane. Not a great game here from Chovy. You know, his playstyle would lead you to believe that honestly he's super suitable to being a top laner, because he plays more like an Alphari or like, you know, that kind of, I'm just gonna go farm, you know, a Keen. I'm gonna do really, really well in lane, and then I'm gonna, you know, just be really strong, and hopefully I can transition that to the late game. You would think that would be more of a top laner playstyle. He plays a lot of top lane kind of champions, but it certainly did not work in this series. Zeus was better than him in Game 2 on the Gnar specifically, and it wasn't really that close. He did not have a great one here. Even if his Game 1 was okay, the rest just weren't really up to snuff. And then nobody else on Gen.G really was phenomenal. Ruler, like I said, had a good Game 1. So did Laspa. I think Laspa actually looked pretty good in this series as well, but the bot lane just wasn't enough to beat the entire team of T1. Quid and Young Jae are clearly not good enough to play at this level yet. They're not, especially Young Jae is just not at this level. He was getting out-jungled by Owner pretty much everywhere. Even when he would go to want to make a play somewhere on the map, Owner would just take some, you know, 2 more things on the other side of the map, and it would end up not being worth it. I think someone made a joke on the cast where it was like, every time Gen.G makes a play, T1 goes up in gold. And that's kind of how it felt this entire game. It's just the macro sense from T1 was pretty phenomenal, but unfortunately, we don't actually get the full extent of what the series could be. It means we're going to have to wait until basically the end of the regular season to see what these teams look like actually going up against each other, but I guess it just builds suspense for their next matchup overall. So Gen.G not looking too good, but again, only really one player playing in their actual role, and he played fine. And then for T1, they take care of business as they should here. They stay undefeated, the only undefeated team in the LCK, and they look pretty dominant doing so. They look like one of the best teams in the world, if not the best team in the world right now. And, you know, if Faker can continue to play at this level, if Owner continues his growth, if Gumayusi and Keria continue to be this good of a bot lane, if Zeus can grow into being more of a competent laner, and not just be a team fighter, I think this team could really be a challenger for the World's Championship this year, and obviously for MSI Trophy as well. But for Gen.G, I don't think I would take this loss too hard if I was a fan of them. Moving on here to the second series of day 4, we had Liiv SANDBOX taking on DAMWON Kia, a battle of top versus bottom, one of the better teams versus one of the worst teams, and it went basically exactly as expected. DAMWON with a really convincing 2-0 series win here. Basically, everybody on DAMWON looked good here, but I want to shout out a few members in particular, most notably Kellen at support, who is my player of the series here. He was really, really good in game 1, especially. That, I know good on Yuumi feels like a weird sentence to say, because how good could you really be on Yuumi? But he did like 8k damage in that game, something absolutely ludicrous, and he didn't even build the damage build that we've seen some other Yuumis in the LCK go. He was just pretty much automatic with the Q. Not that the Q is, you know, impeccably hard to hit, but still, you know, a really good game from him. And then he had a really good Nautilus game in game 2 with the engages. Kellen's honestly been pretty good this year. Dekdum's kind of been hit or miss, but Kellen, I think, has been pretty consistently good and has made this bot lane something to fear. And then Bertle. Bertle had a fantastic game 2 here on the Camille. Basically just completely crushed Dove in lane on the Gragas, and then was able to translate that lead into some really effective team fighting here with the tank Ryze, with an Aphelios. It was really easy for this team to actually win fights later in the game. Let's give a shout out to Showmaker. He's really the only one who has been able to make tank Ryze work, and it was really, really strong here in the game 2. Almost gave him the player of the series for it, because again, tank Ryze can be such an effective pick if it's actually done right. And in this series, it absolutely was done right. The Veigar in game 1 was funny. Love to see Showmaker on a champion like Veigar. I think that's just such a funny thing to see, you know, the best player in the world on a champion like Veigar. Kind of goofy, but it is what it is. And then Canyon was good in game 1. He was fine in game 2. Dekdum, you know, he was good. He was Zeri and Aphelios, and he got a lot of setup, and he played well. I don't think he did anything particularly great. I don't think he did anything particularly poor. DAMWON just looked good overall, I think, the series. As for Liiv, they're just not nearly as good as them. Krako really tried his best, I think, at certain points in the series to make it interesting, especially in that Lee Sin in game 2. We had a really, really nasty kick in a team fight that in almost any other circumstance would have won them the team fight. But, you know, they were so far behind at that point, it essentially didn't matter. Krako is really the only player on this team, is I think what we're really starting to learn. Closer is going to be my dud of the series again. He's had such an atrocious start to the year. He doesn't even look like an LCK caliber mid laner right now. He was awful on the Corki, and that's a pick that you just can't really be awful on. And then, you know, playing LeBlanc into tank Ryze, you just get point and click CC, and you do absolutely nothing the entire fight. So, oops. You can't really blow him up either, because again, he's tank, so really not much you can do there. A bad series from him. Dove gets obliterated in the top lane by Bertle in that game 2 on the Gragas. Not good there. Ice looked okay in game 2 on the Zeri, but even then, like, you just didn't have the support around him. Kale didn't look good at all. This Liiv SANDBOX team is, quite frankly, they just aren't very good. There's really no other way to put it. They're not a good League of Legends team, and that shows. That's pretty abundant, I think, at this point. So, not a lot of good things to say about SANDBOX, but a lot of good things to say about DAMWON. I know this analysis section isn't going to be too long, but honestly, the series went pretty much exactly as expected. Liiv got completely blown out. Pretty much everybody on there played as to expectation. Krako was the lone bright spot on a SANDBOX team that is really struggling, and then DAMWON, you know, with their full roster, just kind of overperformed. This team really could be in a position to contend by the end of the year. Even by the end of the split, Bertle is developing at a ludicrously fast rate here in the top lane. If they can really come together and become a team by playoffs time, I'm still not ruling out the possibility that this is the team that's heading to MSI to represent Korea. Jumping into the final day of LCK Week 4 action here, we had Kwangdong Freecs taking on Nongshim RedForce here, and a rare win for Kwangdong, a 2-0 win. Both of their series wins this year have been 2-0. They have not, however, won a single game in a series that they've lost. Not really important to the series, just something that I noticed and I thought was funny. But let's talk about this series. It was a really dominant KDF win, and again, probably because you're playing almost an entire team of subs for Nongshim. You have 2 starter players in there. One of them is not playing his actual position. Just a brutal run of form here for Nongshim. You have Dundun in there at the top lane, Fiesta in at mid, Vital at ADC, and then Ghost role swapping here to support because you have no effort and you have no Peter. So, yeah, Kwangdong does take this one, as they should. Hoyt's going to be my player of the series here. He was really, really good. Honestly, he was great in game 2 on the Nautilus, and he was still really good in game 1 on the Nautilus. This is the best, by far, that we have seen Hoyt play all year long. This was for sure a support diff, but it's hard to, like, really blame Ghost, because this is a guy who, you know, in case you forgot, is an AD carry main, and plays professionally AD carry. He's a world champion AD carry player that is being forced to play support right now. So, yeah, just not the best situation, but Hoyt looks really good here. Teddy looks really good. This bot lane looked really strong, I think, in general. And then LM also had probably his best series of the year. So did Fate, so did Teddy. Honestly, everybody on KDF actually showed up in this one for both games. And I think that's a really, it's promising, but, how much can you really put stock into it? Because, again, they're basically playing a Challengers team. As for Nongshim, Dun Dun's going to be my dud of the series here. He was, you can make a highlight reel for his Gragas. And, I don't want to flame the kid too hard because, again, he's a Challengers player. He really shouldn't be in this position, but man, it was a brutal game too, for sure. Probably one of the worst games we've seen all year, which just sucks because, you never want to see that at a young player. Again, I'm not going to blame him too hard. He really shouldn't even be put in this position to begin with, but COVID really has put a lot of the LCK under a lot of stress, and this is kind of the peak of that. What I really want to talk about here is Nongshim in general. Going 0-2 this week after they had a little bit of a struggle in week 3, but before that, they were on a really big hot streak, right? This is a team that beat DAMWON 2-0 not too long ago. They were looking really good. They were looking like the 4th best team in the LCK, someone that would certainly make playoffs and could actually maybe even make a difference in the playoffs, but just they've put themselves in a really tough position now because of this COVID situation. Their record is going to drop pretty consistently. They're going to be kind of on the fringe of playoff contention going into next week, and that's assuming they even have their players back for next week. I don't know what protocol is, but assuming they even have their players back for next week, they're already going to be putting themselves in a tough position. If they don't have them back by the time next week starts, you could be looking at a 3-6 kind of start, a 3-7 kind of start, and at that point, you're going to really struggle to get back into playoff contention, even if you really are a good team when you are fully healthy, which I do believe that this Nongshim team is a good team when fully healthy. You just really hope that these losses don't take a huge impact on their standings long term, because this team is much better than what they're showing today, if only because they have to play all backups. But a rough situation overall for Nongshim in general. Just hope it doesn't affect them too much. As for Kwangdong, you're going to be very fortunate that you get a win here, because again, this is a team that has spiraled pretty much completely out of control at this point. They are in an almost unsalvageable position when it comes to playoff position and turning this split into anything even remotely productive. But picking up a win here, maybe it's something that can spark some confidence in this team. It's not like you beat the best of opponents, but, if they dominated this series, they were clearly the better team. They won in 2 games, both games going less than 30 minutes, which is pretty short for LCK timing, at least. So, I don't know. Maybe this does something for your mental. Maybe it doesn't. We'll have to wait and see on that, but either way, KDF is going to be incredibly excited and incredibly happy that they were actually able to pick up a win here, because God, it just feels like it's been so long since they've even won a game that winning a series must feel like euphoria for them. That's going to bring us to our final series here of Week 4 LCK action, and that was Fredit BRION taking on KT Rolster. KT barely manages to bring out a 2-1 series win here in a very competitive series overall. Let's talk about KT first. They win Game 1 off the back of Rascal on this disgusting Akali. I know I'm not the Akali build is really good, and I'm not a fan of the pick just because I think it's annoying, and I don't think it's fun in pro play, but man, I'm such a fan of what Rascal is doing this year. He has been the anchor for this KT Rolster team. When this team wins, it is almost always because Rascal is having a good game, and that was no different in Game 1 here. He was phenomenal there. Game 2 was honestly super good for BRION. The game was relatively close for a little while, but Delight's Rakan was really good in this one overall. Was able to get Morgan ahead. Very similar to what happened in the first couple series. You had Sword play Game 1 and then Morgan play Games 2 and 3. Sword loses in Game 1, you bring Morgan back in for Game 2 on the Akali. He does a lot better. Morgan, at this point, is just clearly the better player as opposed to Sword. I would much rather have Morgan on the team than Sword, and I expect to see that going forward. But Delight looking really good on the Rakan, getting Fredit BRION the Game 2. And then Game 3 was kind of a team effort, I think, overall, but Rascal and Arya pairing up really well. The Gragas, the Twisted Fate, both having really good games here. Cuz comes in for Game 3. Gideon plays Games 1 and 2. And I believe that was because of COVID, although I'm not entirely sure because Cuz hasn't been like the most consistent jungler. I don't actually know if that was a COVID thing. If it was, it makes sense. But Cuz comes in for game 3, and they look a lot more cohesive, I think, as a unit here. My player of the series is going to go to Rascal. I think he was really good here. He has been the star of this KT Rolster team pretty much all year long. And, you know, he's been one of the few top laners, I think, globally that has really been someone that you can watch every single game and say, if this guy wins, I really do believe that they can translate that into a winning game. Unfortunately, the only loss this series came on his signature Lee Sin here, but he pulls it off here. He dominates in game 1, has a really good Gragas game in game 3. Arya, like I said, had a really good Twisted Fate game in game 3, although he was pretty atrociously bad in game 2. Arya has those games, though, it's sometimes he can look fine, and then he can look bad. I'm not exactly sold that Arya is a good mid laner yet, but he did have a really good game 3 here, and then Cuz coming back in clearly was an upgrade to this team. So even if Gideon wasn't because of COVID and it was just like I want to try this out to see if it's better kind of thing, I think Cuz proved that him being in the lineup is going to be better than having Gideon in there. But Aiming and Life were fine. They didn't really do all too much. They weren't all that good in game 2. The Tristana Rel was a very weird lane, I think, overall, especially into Zeri Rakan. It just kind of got bodied. But, yeah, overall, a good series from KT. Not the cleanest series. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. A very clean 2-1. Move along. But Fredit BRION, I think you got to give them some credit for keeping this interesting. Delight, like I said, had a good series. I thought Morgan had a really good series in the games 2 and 3 that he played, the Akali, and especially the Camille game. In game 3, I thought was pretty underrated. He was a big reason why they were in that game in the first place. I think Lava has been, like I said earlier in the week, perennially underrated all year long. He's kind of been a rock for this team overall, but really the dud of the series here has to go to Henna, who just kept getting caught out. He was pretty good in game 1. He was given not nearly enough attention. They might have won the game if they gave more resources to Henna in game 1. But in game 3, man, just not the Aphelios game that you want to remember. Was consistently like getting caught out, not using abilities. I like, whatever you want to say, it was a bad series here from Henna. This is someone who didn't show a lot for me last year either. Really hasn't been that good to start this year. This bot lane's honestly not been the strength of the team at all. And even with Delight playing really well, it felt like Henna was still a weak point for this team. So I'm pretty comfortable in saying that Henna is the worst AD carry in the LCK right now. And that's unfortunate for this BRION team that I think, outside of Henna, I think is kind of showing some stuff. Delight, not always, but in this series, he certainly was a lot better. But this team definitely has talent, and they have shown the ability to go toe-to-toe with good teams in the LCK. It's just whether or not they're going to be able to do that consistently. I still think that they're probably better than, like, the bottom tier of teams right now, but I don't know how much better. Like, I don't think this is a playoff team or anything like that. I just think they don't have the ceiling, but KT Rolster looking okay. Rascal looking like the heart and soul of this KT team. Really, their wins and losses kind of flow through this guy, and if he can continue the pace that he's on, I could see KT actually being a dangerous threat come later in the week. But remember, this is a team that lost to DRX earlier, so we'll see. They just need to get a little bit more consistent, and then I think that they're probably going to be, in that range of like DRX and Nongshim and all these other teams that I think are good, but, we'll see how good by the end of the season. All right, that is going to do it. That was my Week 4 LCK overview and analysis for every series of that week. On the left of your screen right now, you're going to be seeing the updated current LCK standings. Any ties, which I don't think there are, would be broken by alphabetical order, but no ties this time. And then on the right, you're going to see my updated power rankings with how they have changed with a number next to them. Not a ton of changes this week. I think I got it pretty on the money last week, but a couple of things to point out. DRX leapfrogging KT after beating them, but also just looking really good this week in general. And then Hanwha leapfrogging Liiv SANDBOX, who just Liiv doesn't look like a top 8 team. They look like a top 9 team. They look like a bottom 2 team. So Hanwha just had a better week. They look better. Player of the week this week. I had a tough one on this one, but for me, it is going to go to Showmaker on DAMWON. I thought he was the most consistent player in the LCK this week. He was really good in that first series, and he kind of proved that Tank Rise in the right hands can be one of the most impressive and dominant picks in the meta. And that was really the big turning point for me here, was he was taking a pick that I don't think a lot of people in this region, at least, are doing super well on, and was just really dominant on it. So a really good week from Showmaker. And then my dud of the week is going to go to Dove on Liiv SANDBOX in that top lane. Just got pretty beaten up kind of hard in almost every matchup that he played this week, especially by Bertle, who pretty much obliterated him in that game too. But yeah, Dove is going to be my dud of the week, and then Showmaker is going to be my player of the week. So, Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave a like down below. Let me know what you guys' favorite series of the week was, your player of the week, your dud of the week. Anything you really want to talk about down in the comment section below. You guys know I love chatting it up with you. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. I hope you continue to have a wonderful day, and I will see you all later.